I'm John Lentz, City and State Senior Editor, and joining me today is Malalis, Commissioner and Chairwoman of the New York City Commission on Human Rights. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me today, John.
And you recently passed the one-year mark. You've been in this job for a little over 12 months now. I wanted to see what you think is maybe the one accomplishment that has had the most impact in New York City.
You know, I think there are a few. I came into this role, as you said, a little bit over a year ago, really with the idea of transforming the agency. We wanted to make sure that this agency was recognizable to the public, that people knew that there was a city agency out there to combat harassment, discrimination, to be there, especially for the city's most vulnerable communities, and that we could be kind of an open door for city government to folks who were in those positions and for whom coming to government wasn't necessarily something that they were comfortable or had done before in the past. And so I think that we've put the commission out there as all of those things, and we're looking forward to the year ahead where we're able to have an even stronger presence in a lot of those communities.
Just a quick question, human rights, that can be defined very broadly. Some people even divide it as looking at wages and public health, but sometimes there are more narrow definitions. In New York City, within your office, how is it defined and how much leeway do you have there?
Sure, and I think something that's pretty unique to New York City is we are specifically set up as a human rights commission. There are other types of agencies that combat discrimination and harassment in other areas, other cities or states, localities, and they're set up as civil rights agencies. And we're specifically set up to be human rights oriented, which means that we're not just thinking about enforcing anti-discrimination protections in the way that you would generally think of civil rights organizations, but we're also there to affirmatively provide information and outreach, affirmatively address issues. We're not just thinking about things in the context of fighting discrimination and rights in that way, but also providing more ways that people can access intergroup relationships. So I think that's very unique to the Commission.
And before you came on, I think there was some criticism that the office had lost energy. And when you came on, I understand that you've put some more focus on enforcement. And the numbers, some of the numbers bear that out. What have you seen in terms of improvements?
Well, I think that one of the things we wanted to make sure in year one was happening was that we were working as one agency. There's the part of the agency that works to combat discrimination and harassment through law enforcement, but we also do that through community outreach and education and working with the different community groups in the city. We are now working much more so as one agency, so that information on all parts of the agency are connecting, and we're able to capitalize information we're receiving from different community groups to make sure that that's our focus in law enforcement. I think that's also why we're seeing numbers in law enforcement go up. Between 2014 and 2015, for example, complaints went up by, I think we had 200 more complaints in 2015 than in 2014, which I think is considerable, considering the fact that we were also in a transition year. So while rebuilding, while doing kind of a transition from one administration to another, also really focusing our efforts so that the community outreach is really affecting what we're seeing in law enforcement.
And I believe you're one of the last major appointees that de Blasio made. It was February 2015. Do you wish he had installed you sooner so you could have gotten to work and made some of these changes more rapidly?
Well, I think I'm taught by my parents not to look too much back. So it's really just about looking forward. I will say we just came out with our annual report. By statute, we come out with an annual report on March 1st. So ours just came out a few days ago. And if folks take a look at that, I think, if you look at the stats kind of across the board, a lot has gone up. I'm really proud of this past year. I think that, like I said, in enforcement, we've focused in on issues. There's a lot more work that we've been doing with especially immigrant communities across the city. We've been doing a lot more work to combat, discrimination and harassment in areas where I think some of the city's most vulnerable communities were, probably hesitant to come forward in the past, and now we have real relationships with different community groups. So, I think things happen when they happen. I'm happy what we've been able to accomplish in this past year, and I think looking forward, since we're doing less of a rebuild and we're able to really focus more on other specific issues and communities, we're going to see those numbers increase and even more so.
And you mentioned immigrants. One thing recently that came out in the city is that your office would issue visas for undocumented immigrants who are victims of a crime. And I believe it's the first major city that's taken this step. If you could explain a little bit how that will work and how many immigrants might actually qualify under this proposal.
So something to note on this is that actually issuing a visa is only within the province of the federal government, within USCIS. So actual visas are things that the Commission cannot issue. What we can issue, what the Commission issues, are certifications, which are basically the first step in that visa certification process. And so the Commission recently started certifying for UNT visas. These are visas that were created by federal statute in 2000 as a mechanism for making it easier for undocumented immigrants to come forward if they were victims of certain crimes so that they could report those crimes, help law enforcement address those crimes in situations where, in the past, perhaps people were scared of coming forward because they're undocumented, and so those crimes would go unaddressed. What we find at the Commission now, there are situations in which those types of crimes have direct relationships to claims that one would make under the city human rights law. So for instance, if someone is in an employment situation where they are being sexually harassed, and that harassment manifests itself as sexual assault or rape, those would be considered two crimes that would be eligible crimes for URT visas. And we would be able to work with the individuals for purposes of certification, again, the first step in the process of applying for a URT visa.
And then just one last thing I want to ask about. A year ago, or sometime in the last year, there was this ban the box legislation. And so if you're an employer in New York City, you can't look at the criminal history of someone who's applying for a job until, I think, later on in the process. I was just curious, how do you balance that with an employer's desire to, not want to have an applicant come in, take a job if they have some kind of criminal background? How do you balance, making sure these people with low-level offenses aren't kept from jobs, but also the concern that employers might have?
Well, so prior to the Fair Chance Act, so our local law is called the Fair Chance Act, prior to that becoming effective in October of this past year, there already were in place protections against discrimination based on criminal history. What I think the Fair Chance Act did really kind of balances the issues that you're talking about. With the Fair Chance Act, the way it changed those protections, it basically said that most employers, because there are certain exemptions, but most employers should not be looking at any sort of criminal history or asking for any criminal history information until after a conditional offer of employment is made. So what does that mean in practice? In practice, that means that, someone's having an interview, someone is filling out an application. The focus for that candidate is going to be on qualifications, on their past experiences for the job, on the relationship that they have with their interviewer for that job and for that position. Only after that interviewer or that employer has said, you know what, I like this person, they're qualified, they're experienced, this is the type of person I want working with me. Only after that happens are they able to ask about any sort of criminal history. So what that means is that they're really giving consideration to make sure that whatever that criminal history information is really has a direct enough relationship to the position in question or poses some sort of unreasonable risk to the public, that it really makes it that it doesn't make sense for that employment relationship to go forward. But they've already, they've found that person qualified enough or they like that person enough for the position in the first place to offer the job.
Commissioner Malalis, thank you.
Thank you.